day the iron bell rang at Fort Laramie's trading yard, the dust lay thick as shame on the boots of men who had long forgotten the weight of another human soul, and beneath the fluttering canvas awnings and the sharp smell of sweat, leather and whiskey, she stood chained, not broken, not bowed, an Apache woman with eyes like storm-darkened flint, watching the crowd as if she were measuring their worth rather than waiting to be measured herself. Her wrists marked by iron, but her spine straight with a pride no auctioneer's shout could drown. She had been captured months earlier after her people were scattered by gunfire and betrayal, marched across plains that once sang beneath her feet, and now the traders called her goods. Yet in her heart she still carried her true name, the one given by her mother beside a river at dawn, a name that meant she who endures, though none here cared to ask it. And when the auctioneer's voice cracked through the air describing her as strong, obedient, useful, she lifted her chin and spoke before fear could still her tongue, her words slicing through the noise like a blade. "Buy me, cowboy, and I will make sure you are satisfied." A sentence born not of submission but of strategy, a calculated spark thrown into dry tinder, because she had learned that men listened, most when they thought they were being promised something they wanted. And the crowd laughed, some crudely, some nervously, while others leaned closer, curiosity lighting their eyes. And among them stood a man who had not come to buy a person at all, Ethan Cole, a drifter turned ranch hand, a man with dust in his beard and grief stitched into his silence, who had ridden in that morning only to sell hides and buy flour, carrying the weight of a brother, lost in a conscience he kept buried, under work and whiskey. Ethan had seen auctions before, had told himself it was none of his business, but when her gaze met his, something twisted painfully in his chest, because there was no plea there, no begging, only a fierce intelligence and a challenge that dared him to see her as human. And as bids began to rise, he tried to turn away, reminding himself that one man could not undo a world. Yet each shouted number felt like a hammer striking bone, until he realized with a kind of quiet horror that the men bidding were not farmers or families, but those who saw cruelty as sport. And without fully deciding, he raised his hand, his voice steady despite the thunder in his ears, offering more than he could afford, more than made sense, silencing the yard as heads turned and the auctioneer grinned, delighted by the sudden spike. And when the final bell rang, it was Ethan's money that changed hands, and the chain that bound her wrists was passed to him like a receipt. And in that moment she studied him closely, noting the way his grip was firm but not cruel, the way he did not look at her like property. And as they walked away from the yard, the laughter fading behind them, she spoke again low so only he could hear, telling him he had made a dangerous choice, and he answered just as quietly that danger was nothing new to him. The journey to his cabin took 2 days, across open land where the sky pressed down like a judgment and memories rose unbidden, and at night he untied her wrists so she could eat and sleep, though he kept his rifle close, unsure whether he was protecting himself from her or her from the world. And she did not run, not because she could not, but because she was watching, learning, waiting, speaking little yet observing everything. The way he said a name before sleeping, the way his hands trembled when he thought no one saw, the way he left water out for birds. And by the time they reached the cabin, a lonely structure crouched against the edge of the hills, something unspoken had begun to shift between them. Inside, Ethan made it clear she was not his servant, not his possession, telling her she could leave when she wished. And that night she laughed softly, a sound edged with sorrow, asking him where exactly an Apache woman was supposed to go, in a land fenced and patrolled by those who hunted her kind. And her words struck him harder than accusation, forcing him to confront the lie he had told himself, that kindness alone could undo chains, forged by a nation. And as days passed, neighbors began to notice her presence, their looks sharp with suspicion, their questions edged with threat, while she helped around the cabin not out of obligation but shared survival, fixing what was broken, moving with the quiet competence of someone raised by the land itself. And at night she told stories of her people, not to beg for pity but to keep them alive and sound, while Ethan listened, his understanding of the world cracking open. And when riders were seen in the distance, men with war paint and rifles both, symbols of conflict colliding, fear rippled through the valley, because everyone knew violence followed rumor like thunder follows lightning. And she stood at the cabin door, eyes narrowed, telling Ethan that the past had a way of catching those who thought they could outrun it, and that the words she had spoken at the auction had been both bait and promise, not of pleasure but of consequence, because satisfaction, to her, meant justice, meant survival, meant making sure the truth was paid in full. As the wind rose and the horizon darkened with approaching riders, Ethan realized that buying her freedom had only been the first step into a reckoning neither of them could escape, and that whatever came next would test not only his courage but his soul. And as the fire crackled and the night pressed close, the story of a captive and a cowboy became something far more dangerous, a story of choice, of resistance, and of a bond forged in the crucible of a brutal frontier, where every promise carried a price, and every act of mercy demanded sacrifice.